From the Weather Channel, this is Storm Stories with meteorologist Jim Cantori.
Canadian sailing buffs Robin and Maggie Ansell are living out a fantasy. They're halfway through an extended venture around the Pacific aboard their 54-foot yacht, the Orca.
The trip of a lifetime, I would think I would describe the second part of our journey.
After a short hiatus in northern Australia, the couple sail off under clear blue skies.
We had brisk 20 to 25 knot winds and sailing really nicely. We have a heavy vessel. She likes the strong winds. We sailed for a day and very good conditions.
But the weather begins to change, and by the next morning, the Ansells wake to nature's first warning signs.
The first sign that it was going to be something more than just a regular storm was when the barometer started falling really rapidly, and accompanying that was the increase in height of seas.
A dropping barometer means the approach of a low-pressure system, strengthening winds, and the arrival of a cold front. If the pressure falls fast, sailors know a strong storm is coming.
The seas had got to about 20 feet in height, and the winds were 40-odd knots.
As the couple forges ahead, they see more troubling signs.
The seas were very confused. They were coming from several different angles.
Churning waves are often a precursor to a major storm. In this case, a cyclone. Justin.
We got that dreaded radio call from the weatherman to say that it had become cyclonic and named Justin.
Well, I felt sick. Literally, I just sank onto the couch and thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do?
The Ansells begin planning maneuvers, realizing that turning back would mean braving the coral reef from which they came.
We were in a difficult situation there in that we didn't have very many places to run to. In fact, we really didn't have anywhere to run to. To try and turn around and go back through the reef would have been suicide.
They read the changes in the sky. The cloud layer builds and grows darker and more threatening.
It just got progressively thicker, and eventually it's difficult to distinguish the clouds from the sea. It's sort of melds into one grey mass.
Below deck, they check their instruments and maps, trying to plot their safest course of action and hope the cyclone will pass quickly. But what they don't know is that this is an unusual cyclone.
Well, it was an extremely powerful cyclone. In terms of sheer size, it was the largest cyclone we've seen here probably in decades.
But this storm isn't just large, it's stationary. Robin and Maggie lower their main sails and hang on as huge waves that lift the boat skyward pummel them. The pounding continues for 2 days and nights. As the cyclone rages on, Robin realizes they're careening full speed into the dangerous Malay Reef, an isolated rock barrier outside the Great Barrier Reef.
We could see it had entered our screen on the radar, and we knew then that we were in trouble.
The couple decides to drop anchor, but something goes wrong. A chemical resin from the unwashed line literally blinds Maggie and Robin.
We found we couldn't focus. Our eyes were burning. It was just like a bright green blur on the radar. We couldn't see anything.
It isn't until the next morning that the Ansells can see again. They check their radar screens and realize that they are close to smashing into the deadly reef. And the storm is just getting worse. Then, a giant rogue wave slams into the Orca.
We heard this tremendous rush like an express train rushing alongside, and ended up with a huge bang on the side of the hull.
Frantic, they race to the cabin searching for damage. In the galley, a porthole has been smashed in.
And this great trunk spout waterfall just cascaded in and in and in and in right in front of me, and gradually the floor filled up until I was about ankle deep. And I thought then, oh God, we are a cement vessel. They don't float when they're full of water.
Townsville Radio.
They radio a mayday to authorities in Townsville, Australia. 2 200 miles offshore in the roughest conditions imaginable, Robin and Maggie aren't expecting anyone's help. At the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, helicopter pilot Peter Holt received the call.
My initial reaction was that we couldn't make it. It was too far. It was just out of the range of the helicopter to be able to get out there and to effect the rescue.
The helicopter crew decides to unload as much weight as they can to gain precious flying time. The crew calculates that after travel time, they have only minutes to pluck Robin and Maggie off the sailboat. It takes Peter and the crew almost 2 hours to fly to the Orca. The huge waves make it impossible to hoist the Anzels off the deck of the boat that is now filled with 6 feet of water.
It was too dangerous to winch them off the vessel. Our winch cable would have for sure got entangled in the rigging of the yacht, and there was no time to dismast the yacht, for them to dismast it. We didn't have the fuel.
He radios Maggie and Robin instructions.
So I asked them to get their longest piece of rope, attach themselves to the dinghy and jump overboard.
Maggie jumps in first and Robin follows, but he flips out of the dinghy and into the open ocean.
I just flailed around, I guess, with my arms, and luckily hooked one onto one of the straps on the dinghy.
Paramedic Angus McDonald is lowered to the Anzels. With remaining fuel, he knows that he only has 2 minutes to get to both sailors. If he can get only one within the allotted time, the other one will be left behind.
Chivalry doesn't play any part in rescues. When we'd put Angus into the water, there was no time to waste in picking who was going to come up first. The closest one came up first.
Robin doesn't realize this as Ian fights to reach him. He hooks Robin in, leaving Maggie in the water.
I was looking directly at him because he was head on to me, had his arms around me and was instructing me to put my arms around him to hang on so we didn't come apart. And that's when it went through my head that, no, this is not right. It shouldn't be me.
With less than a minute to spare, Angus drops back into the water and grabs Maggie. He puts her into the harness, and they're winched up just in time. The crew has just enough fuel to head back to the coast. While tropical cyclones hit the Australian coast as often as 3 or 4 times a year, few are as persistent or powerful as Cyclone Justin. The storm that persevered for 3 straight weeks is recorded as one of the longest-lasting cyclones in the South Pacific. Next on Storm Stories, a man clings to a pole as a flash flood threatens to rip him to his death. Torrential rains have been pounding the Rocky Mountain town of Fort Collins, Colorado since yesterday. A staggering amount of rain saturates the ground. Water gushing everywhere triggers heavy flooding. People all over the city are caught in the deluge. In the nearby town of Berthoud, Assistant Fire Chief Rick Slavey arrives home after work and receives an unexpected call. The area's dive team is being dispatched to help in the emergency. Rick jumps into his truck and picks up another dive team member, Dave Hanojost. They head for Fort Collins.
We were scanning the radio stations trying to figure out exactly where we were supposed to respond to. There was several different reports of cars that were flooded and needed people needing help. We would head towards one, and before we could get to that scene, we were called off and headed toward another scene.
At the Johnson Mobile Home Park, Felipe Flores is watching the flood warnings on the news, unaware of how close he is to danger. Looking out the window, he can see the water rising. Felipe knows he must leave his home. But when he steps into the surging floodwaters, he finds the current stronger than he expected. He is thrown toward a nearby tree as the water gushes around him. He holds on for his life and calls for help.
We'll get you, just hang on!
Driving into Fort Collins, Rick and Dave are surprised by the extent of the flooding.
It was real dark outside. There's quite a bit of water in the roads. You couldn't go in any one direction very far without having to turn off because of a lot of water crossing the roads.
As Rick and Dave make their way into town, they say they can hear people calling for help.
The water was right up to the bottom of the bridge, and there was debris and all kinds of stuff coming down the what used to be a little creek.
In the distance, Dave spots people caught in the rising water, and the team moves into action. For the next hour, Rick and other rescuers work tirelessly to help stranded residents. The water has risen 4 feet in just 4 hours.
Sheriff, you need that vest? It's all moving! The whole thing's moving! Get out of the way quick!
As Rick works his way down the flooded street, he spots Felipe still clinging to the tree.
We'll get you, just hang on!
Huge pieces of debris were falling on top of me. They were pushing me onto the tree. I just kept telling myself that it would be over soon. It was all I could do to hang on. I thought I would die.
Hold on to the tree!
Felipe knows that he can't hang on for much longer. If he lets go, he'll be swept away.
Okay, we're trying to get somebody to you.
And the water just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. It's just like somebody pushing on you all the time and you're just fighting it.
Debris comes hurtling toward him. Rick can barely get out of the way. Exhausted from the pressure of the water, Rick realizes that he must do something to save himself, and he grabs onto a pole.
At the last minute, I finally got my foot hooked into it right, and I pulled myself up. And it was all I could do just to sit up there and hold myself up to keep from falling into the water. And I really thought that if anything came down and hit that pole, that was it. I was gone. I couldn't hold on. I was wasted.
Police officers realize that the current is too strong to go in after Rick.
I've got the fire department. They said they have nothing that can get for these people. There's some kids stuck over here. The fire department went to work on it.
But then, a couple of sheriff's officers launch a Zodiac raft and head up the street. Rick motions for them to get Felipe first, but they approach him. Suddenly, the boat's motor shuts down. The two rescuers begin drifting backwards down the cascading rapids.
The current just pulled in. They couldn't get it restarted, and just pulled them sucking right down over that black hole, the big cascading waterfall.
As Rick watches his rescuers disappear in the rapids, he loses hope for himself and Felipe.
Well, my thoughts were for my family. That was weighing heavy on my mind. Wondering if I was ever going to see them again.
Downstream, struggling with the current, rescuers manage to rope the raft and tow it back. The Zodiac crew reaches Rick and helps him into the boat. Then Felipe is also rescued. Rick and Felipe are both exhausted and hypothermic, but they are alive. More than 14 inches of water fell on Fort Collins in 31 hours. This flood is recorded as the most severe in Colorado in the past 100 years. Next, a storm spotter sounds a tornado warning, but can't get out of the way. Stay with us as Storm Stories continue. It's the beginning of spring in the American Midwest. Across these counties, volunteer storm spotters like Lonnie McVeigh in Decatur, Illinois, watch the skies for dangerous weather.
You use your senses of inflow, like the wind direction. You know you're looking in the right direction when you feel the wind to your back.
Wind direction is one way on the ground to verify and locate an approaching tornado. A spinning plume dropping out of the base of a cloud and moving toward the ground is the most significant prelude to a tornado. Storm spotters are taught a basic rule of thumb.
If it don't spin, then don't turn it in.
But on April 18th, a tornado comes through in the dark. which makes it almost impossible to spot.
So you get one quick glance at maybe a formation, a lowering.
But in the dark, Lonnie and other storm spotters miss the funnel. The tornado roars into Decatur without warning. Spotters say the warning sirens never sounded. The tornado leaves behind a path of destruction. The next morning, the people of Decatur pick up the pieces. Roofs have been peeled off houses, and cars overturned.
People had been taken away from their homes, and my heart had sunk down into my belly. I felt like I'd missed an opportunity to do a real good thing for the community.
Later that afternoon, Lonnie is at home watching television with his wife. They're watching the news when they see that another tornado warning is in effect for that night.
I thought this couldn't be happening 2 days in a row. I mean, we'd already been hit.
He goes out for another night of storm spotting and sets up beside a local church.
I was afraid that I'd made a terrible mistake the night before. I was hoping that I'd just go out and do a better job the next time through.
Lonnie checks in with the Storm Spotters Network. To his amazement, he hears reports that a tornado has touched down nearby.
The reports that I received were telling me that the tornado was in Springfield directly west of us and was moving northeast.
Within seconds, Lonnie notices the first sign of a tornado. He feels a strong and steady inflow of wind moving toward the storm.
As the storm approached, we got a gust front, about 30 miles an hour.
Meanwhile, directly across the street, Kelly Miller is having dinner with her 2 children in the basement of their house. She hears about the tornado on the radio.
I decided to go upstairs to see the weather, to see what the sky was doing, and that's when I seen Lonnie McVeigh in the road in front of the church that's right across from our house. I approached Lonnie and asked him what he was doing.
Lonnie tells Kelly things are getting dangerous.
You could see how enormous this front was. It was black and green, and there was like a separation in the clouds in the sky.
It's an unusually low, dark cloud base, another ominous sign. Then Lonnie sees something even more alarming.
I noticed a dark spot that was south of me, and I could see rotation, and I reported it on the radio. The siren sounded.
Just then, a tornado touches down within sight.
I saw the tornado. It was across our field, and at that point, I was extremely scared.
Kelly. Lonnie makes one final report.
I seen it was getting bigger, and I reported that it was coming right at me.
Lonnie and Kelly race to shelter.
Both of us were just scared to death.
Kelly grabs her kids and covers their heads with a pillow. They can hear the roar of the twister coming closer and closer. Storm Stories will return in a moment. Within seconds, the tornado is over Kelly Miller's house.
Things were shaking in the room, and all the windows blew out of the house. I thought I was going to die.
The Miller house moves 10 feet off its foundation. The chimney lifts off and lands on top of Lonnie McVeigh. A nearby tree crashes into the open basement. And then, quiet. Minutes later, Decatur ambulance driver Steve Skelton arrives on the scene. He is shocked by what he sees.
Well, when we pulled up on scene, Harristown Fire Department was here, and we seen this house completely turned upside down.
Unbelievably, Kelly and her kids survived with only minor injuries. Rescuers are unsure of Lonnie's condition.
We knew Lonnie was hurting from the waist down, so of course the first thing we did was put him on a backboard and full spinaled him.
Lonnie is rushed to the hospital where doctors fear his hip is crushed. He may never walk again. The tornado has cut a fresh and devastating swath through Decatur. Miraculously, no one is killed. In the hospital, Lonnie is showered with gifts and cards. Because he sounded the alarm, people say they had time to take shelter.
The importance of the weather spotter we can't overemphasize too much, and you get out farther away from the radar, you have smaller communities, it's harder to get the bigger army of spotters.
After months of rehabilitation, Lonnie can now get around with the help of a walker. From his desk at home, he still helps the spotter network with tracking storms. For Storm Stories, I'm meteorologist Jim Cantor. Your local forecast is next. A mile-wide F5 tornado rips through Oklahoma. How many people live to tell this tale? You're going to find out next on Storm Stories.